Hi, greetings, fellow Trekkies and Trekkers. We'll look at Season 3 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Nakato's on with Visionary. Dr. Bashir is tending to Chief O'Brien in the ops pit. When O'Brien asks what happened, Commander Sisko tells him that one of the plasma conduits blew out while he was attempting to reroute a phase inducer. Bashir tells O'Brien that he has a mild case of radiation poisoning, but we're injecting him with a dose of Hyrolin to counter the effects. The doctor recommends Bashir be placed on light duty for the next few days, and Sisko agrees. Before they can discuss the matter further, Major Kira interrupts with news that a Romulan delegation has arrived and is requesting permission to dock. Sisko allows them to dock at Bay 12. He and Kira will meet them there. Before heading out, the commander gives O'Brien one word of advice. Light means light, he says. Sisko doesn't want O'Brien spending the night crawling through Jeffries tubes looking for power surges. The chief jokingly replies, "You won't get any arguments today, Commander." On the promenade, Kira and Sisko are on their way to meet the Romulan delegation when a drunken Klingon staggers out of Quark's, assisted by two Bajoran security guards. Constable Odo explains that a Klingon freighter had to dock with the station and, due to computer error, will not be able to depart until it is repaired, which will take at least 2 more days. Sisko takes Odo aside and asks him to keep a close eye on the Klingons, as the commander doesn't want to get them in the way of the Romulans. Odo acknowledges Sisko's request, and the drunken Klingon is taken to a holding cell. Kira and Sisko continue to the docking port, where 2 Starfleet security guards are waiting. The circular doors are wheeled back, and a Romulan named Rowan steps out, followed closely by his aide, Karina, and 2 guards. Sisko offers them accommodation after a long trip, but all Rowan is interested in are intelligence reports on the Dominion. The commander exchanges a brief glance with Kira before escorting their guests to the wardroom. In his bar, Quark is setting up Dartford for O'Brien, but he is skeptical it will bring him any profit. The chief confidently notes that darts and bars go together like bacon and eggs, to which Quark reminds him that people actually order bacon and eggs, and no one has of yet asked to see a dartboard. In an attempt to convince, O'Brien hands Quark some darts and challenges him to hit the bullseye. Quark, unaware of how to play the game, throws them all at once, hitting Morn in the process. The Ferengi points out how dangerous the game is. After all, if one of his customers is injured, he could be held liable. But the chief doesn't give in and picks up a dart, intent on showing Quark how the game is properly played. As he aims for the board, there's a bright flash of light, and he's transported to the upper level of the promenade. But something isn't quite right. O'Brien looks across the way and sees himself, arguing with Quark about the damage the Klingons are doing to 2 of his holosuites. Quark asks O'Brien that a maintenance crew be dispatched immediately. A confused look comes across his face as the other O'Brien tells Quark to keep the Klingons out of the holosuites from now on. Finishing his conversation, he turns away, and the 2 lock eyes, both incredibly confused by what is happening. Before they can say anything, the original O'Brien is back in Quark's. His dart hits the bullseye, and he falls to the floor, disoriented. In the infirmary, Dr. Bashir explains that the chief's aerial collapse is due to sudden decrease in his serum calcium levels, a common side effect of the radiation poisoning, and gives him a dose of acinolithin for the pain. The doctor continues to explain his vision was also likely a mild side effect, though the chief isn't fully convinced. He explains it to Bashir, who jokingly mocks him, saying he has a sadly deficient fantasy life. At that note, O'Brien sarcastically thanks the doctor for his help and leaves. In the wardroom, Rowan proclaims that the Dominion is the greatest threat the Alpha Quadrant has seen in the last century, and wants to know exactly what Sisko and his crew have obtained through use of their cloaking device on the USS Defiant. The commander admits they know very little of the Dominion. Karina responds, asking about Odo, and correctly referring to him as a founder. She believes they could tell them all they need to know about the Dominion, though Major Kira soon corrects her, aware that Odo may be a changeling, but he is not a founder and wants nothing to do with them. The commander backs her up by telling him it is the truth, whether they choose to believe it or not. Rowan reminds Sisko that they agreed to install the cloaking device in exchange for information on the Dominion, but they have received very little so far. He goes on to demand every piece of information Starfleet has on them, no matter how insignificant, including any classified reports made to Starfleet Command. Sisko says he will have to clear it with his superiors first. On the upper level of the promenade, Quark is complaining to O'Brien about the damage the Klingons have caused to holosuites. In the middle of his sentence, O'Brien stops and, remembering his previous vision, looks aggressively to where he was standing before. Another O'Brien is there watching them. This time, Quark sees him and observes that O'Brien currently has bigger problems than his holosuites. A few seconds later, the other O'Brien disappears. In Sisko's office, Jadzia Dax reports that she did detect a minor temporal disturbance in Quark's, and another later on the promenade, around the same time O'Brien had his visions. It soon becomes apparent that O'Brien did travel to the future and then back again, to the same moment he left. Dax theorizes that the ionizing radiation he was exposed to earlier may have something to do with it and wants to examine Dr. Bashir's medical scans. Before she can explain further, the Chief flashes back to Quark's in the middle of a bar fight and sees himself fighting with a Klingon. The future O'Brien is knocked to the ground, in which another Klingon takes out his Daktog and heads towards him. O'Brien quickly grabs the Klingon's arm, knocking the dagger away and throwing him to the floor. Just as he avoids a barred stool being thrown at him, he flushes back to the commander's office, where he again collapses to the floor. Dax and Sisko quickly rush to his aid, but he doesn't respond. He is unconscious. Back in the infirmary, Bashir has run a microcellular scan and has detected damage to O'Brien's cerebrospinal nerve cells, which he thinks has been caused by the time shifting. The doctor explains that while he can repair the current damage, the effect is cumulative and there may come a time, if the time shifting continues, when he can no longer repair the damage, and O'Brien could die. Sisko comforts him, saying Dax is doing every scanner on station for any temporal abnormalities, which is of some relief to O'Brien. If anyone can find the cause of the time shifts, it's Dax, he says with a relaxed smile. The commander goes on to ask him if he was aware how far ahead the time shifts are taking him, in case it affects the meeting with the Romulans, but he doesn't know. Sisko decides to ask Odo to increase security around Quark's bar just in case. At that moment, Major Kira walks in and, after asking how O'Brien is, she walks Commander Sisko onto the promenade. They pass a Bajoran stall, she explains that the Romans want to debrief everyone on who was on the Defiant when it was captured by the Founders and restricted access to the ship and all personal logs. Sisko immediately rejects access to personal logs, but asks to permit them limited access to the ship and allow debriefings of crew. He explains to Kira how the Romulans are completely dependent on them for information, to which a frustrated Kira suggests they send them with their own ships through the wormhole. He continues to explain how the Romulans generally prefer to sit back and pull the strings from a distance if they can. And though Kira replies she is one puppet who doesn't like her strings pulled, she accepts his orders. As they part ways, Sisko reminds her to be diplomatic, to which she replies, "I'm always diplomatic." In the wardroom, Kira yells at the Romans for insinuating she abandoned the Defiant prematurely during the battle with the Jem'Hadar, but they see her emotional outbursts as evidence that they are correct in their assessment. Waxing a little, she continues to explain how she was trapped in a hand-to-hand fight below decks and was knocked unconscious before Odo put her on the shuttle. She says she only came to after they left the ship and there was nothing they could have done. Ron begins to question why Odo didn't help any of the other crew, but Kira defends him, insisting they were blocked in. Karina then asks her why she was in Odo's quarters before the attack, and rather keenly suspects that Odo might be harboring feelings for Kira, which pushes Kira further over the edge. She puts an abrupt end to their questioning, saying they can rip the cloaking device from the Defiant, and advises them not to ask Odo the same questions, or they might just find themselves on the other side of the bulkhead, floating home. Rom and Karina share a nervous glance as Kira storms out of the room, pushing the guards to one side. In Quarks, Bashir has just beaten O'Brien in the 10th game of darts in a row. He tells the chief that because he has told them what happened, he has changed the future. With the increased security and Quark's promise not to Klingons in, the fight won't happen, though O'Brien is entirely convinced. Just then, 3 Klingons make their way down from the holosuites. Chief grabs Quark by his arm and demands an explanation as to why they are in the bar. Pulling out a bar of latinum, he replies that the Klingons weren't in the bar, they were the holosuites, and besides, they are paying him triple to use them. 3 Klingons walk over to 2 Romulans seated at a table and call them filthy patak. Another suggests they show them the way out. Not wants to take insults, the 2 Romulans stand and begin to confront their aggressors. In the security office, Kira's telling Odo what Rowan said about them, which makes Odo feel slightly uncomfortable given that he does indeed have feelings for her. They're suddenly interrupted by a call from Quark. The fight is broken out on the bar. O'Brien gets into a fist fight with the Klingon, but using his knowledge he manages to get the upper hand. This time knocks him to the floor. He then sees his younger self, who attacks another Klingon, whittling out Dik-Tak, thereby fulfilling his second vision. As he warns his past self about the flying bar stool, Odo rushes in and breaks up the fight. But before O'Brien has a chance to recover, he is again flung into another future. This time, he peers into a corridor in the habitat ring where he sees his future self opening a panel. It calls out to him, but before he can do anything, a sharp bolt of energy is fired out from the panel, knocking his future self to the ground. The chief rushes to see if he's alright. After feeling his pulse, he realizes he himself is dead. O'Brien walks to the infirmary where he was taken after the fight. Bashir tells him everything is okay and he's going to be alright, but O'Brien knows otherwise. No, I'm not, he says. In a few hours I'm going to be dead. Sisko, O'Brien, and Odo are in the corridor where the accident happened. The chief believes there was some sort of phaser or energy laser that killed his future self, but a scan of the bulkhead reveals nothing. Odo carefully opens the panel, but again there was nothing but the computer display inside. The theory is that the perpetrator is yet to plant the device, but he will do so in the next few hours. Odo suggests placing a surveillance device in the corridor so they can observe if anyone does indeed try and tamper with the panel, at which point they are ordered by Dax over the comm system. She wants Sisko and O'Brien to head up to Ops. She says she has found a clue as to the chief's time shifting. Up in Ops, Dax explained that she tried several scans of the surrounding space, but got nothing until she ran a scan on the lower subspace bandwidths, which turned up some curious Tetron emissions. O'Brien remarks he hasn't seen emissions like that inside of a neutron star. Dax, however, suggests the presence of a quantum singularity. The only strange thing is that it isn't affecting the gravimetric field signature of the station as it should. Sisko, assuming that a quantum singularity is responsible, turns to Bashir and asks how its effects can be combated. Bashir theorizes that the singularity is attached to the Delta series radioisotopes in O'Brien's body, effectively pulling him along like a magnet. And if that's the case, he may have a cure for it, but it's going to take some time. He warns the chief that he could experience one or two more time jumps before the process has been completed. O'Brien wants to get started right away, so heads down to the infirmary with Bashir. Meanwhile, Sisko orders Dax to continue to pinpoint the singularity in an effort to get rid of it. Just then, Major Kira enters Ops and informs the commander she had to move the Romulans to alternative quarters as the replicators were malfunctioning. It just so happens that the quarters she has moved them to are on level 2, section 47, directly adjacent to where the future O'Brien was killed. Kira suggests moving them to a different room, but Sisko objects so as not to alert those responsible. Instead, he tells her to inform Odo and let the scenario play out before they make any further moves. A short while later, Sisko is summoned to Odo's office where he informs him that someone has planted a Class 3 surveillance device at the bulkhead, though he doesn't know who has used a low-energy transporter to put it there. Sisko calls it a delicate piece of transporter work. Odo's on to say that although they cannot trace the transporter signal, it at least originated from the station as there were no ships in range at the time. The Klingons are the prime suspects, but Odo also intends to investigate the Bajorans, Quark, and the visiting Taurelians just to make sure. Sisko asks if Odo actually considers Quark a suspect, and Odo explains that he always investigates Quark as a matter of procedure. In Quark's, Bashir and O'Brien are waiting out the time when he has until his death in the other future when Quark arrives with the drinks they ordered. Being his usual self, he also asks O'Brien to keep an eye out for the numbers on the Dabo wheel next time he jumps into the future. O'Brien doesn't pay any attention to him and suggests he and Bashir leave. As they exit the upper level, O'Brien is again flung into the future, this time using the infirmary. He notices a body on one of the biobeds, covered in a white sheet. He slowly walks towards it and lifts the top to reveal his own corpse. O'Brien covers up his dead body laying on the biobed when Bashir walks around the corner. He'd been expecting him and had some important news for the chief to pass on to Bashir's past self. The radiation had damaged the basilar arteries in O'Brien's brainstem, which hadn't shown up on any scans and was only picked up in the autopsy. Bashir instructs him to tell himself to run a basilar arterial scan so he can detect and repair the damage in time. O'Brien begins to argue with Bashir about his inability to save him, but he flashes back to the upper level of the promenade. O'Brien falls to the floor and Bashir summons a nurse and an emergency medkit there immediately. In the habitat ring, Odo explains to Sisko that he was finally able to trace back the source of the transporter beam to some empty quarters. Sisko speculates that they brought in a portable transporter, but Odo quickly discounts it as the technology is too bulky to be dragging around the halls. Sisko nods in agreement as Odo continues to explain how they modified the replicator, turning it into a mini transporter bay by realigning the matter-energy conversion matrix. A very sophisticated and professional job. Reaching into the replicator's circuitry, Odo pulls out a device which he says is manufactured on Davos 3, a planet on the Klingon border in which just 90% of its trade with the Klingon Empire. Sisko doesn't think it is enough to hold the Klingons, and Odo agrees, but there's more. A friend at Starfleet Intelligence that used to be assigned to the Federation Embassy on Kronos put him in contact with an old Klingon operative who provided him with information showing the 3 Klingons currently on the station are part of a covert strike force, reporting directly to the High Council. They don't have enough to hold the Klingons for questioning that Odo feels he can continue until after the Romulans have left the station. Sisko agrees, though tells Odo to be careful, to which he replies, there was no careful way to question a Klingon. O'Brien is back at the infirmary where Bashir is scanning him. He wakes up and tells Bashir he needs to run the Paciliar arterial scanner or he'll die within a few hours. Well, who am I to argue with me? Bashir jokes. Meanwhile, Odo has arrested 3 Klingon operatives, Barak, Atul, and Morka, and has placed them in a holding cell for the time being. He accuses them of being spies and saboteurs, to which they simply reply with threats of vengeance. Odo tries to threaten his own by telling them if they help him he will forego telling the Klingon intelligence service that they have been captured. He says for any fears they frown on operatives who fail their missions. The Klingons look at each other, thinking about his offer. Back in Ops, Bashir informs Sisko that he's eliminated almost all the radioisotopes from O'Brien's system and that the treatment is in a couple more hours, after which there should be no more time shifting. Dax also reports that the quantum singularity is orbiting the station in a roughly elliptical pattern. O'Brien continues by saying that the anomaly radiates temporal energy at certain points in its orbit, which seem to be causing its time shifts. At that very moment, he shifts again. There are lots of people scrambling into a runabout. His future self is at the helm and initiates an emergency escape protocol, disengaging the docking clamps and immediately engaging full impulse. All 3 of the station's runabouts hastily escape the vicinity as explosions cascade across the habitat ring. The future O'Brien explains he was sleeping when an explosion rocked the station and was also in Ops when the evacuation alarm sounded, so got as many people as he could to the runabout before leaving. He tells O'Brien that he doesn't know what happened or if the other senior staff made it off the station, and urges to find out what happened and prevent it. As the runabout flies away, the explosions engulf the station, destroying it. At that point, the wormhole opens only to suddenly collapse an instant later. O'Brien watches the events in horror before he shifts. Back in Ops, Sisko asks the Chief what's wrong. We've got a new problem, sir, he replies. Sisko questions O'Brien on his latest time shift, asking for any clue that the station may be destroyed. O'Brien says he noticed some explosions on the habitat ring, but it all happened so fast he couldn't get a clear sense of what exactly was going on. The commander orders a silent preparation for evacuation should need to come to that, but doesn't want to do anything that would alarm their enemy into attacking sooner. He also orders Dax to do a complete systems check on anything that could potentially cause this type of disaster. The Chief also has an idea. If they could cause him to travel into the future on purpose, this time only by 2 or 3 hours, he may be able to find out what the threat is and stop it happening in their timeline. Bashir knows the problem with the plan. In order to do this, O'Brien's body would need to be flooded with Delta Series radioisotopes, and prolonged exposure would kill him. But the Chief knows the risk and is willing to do it if it means saving everyone on DS9. After thinking on it for a few seconds, Sisko approves his plan and they get to work. In the infirmary, Bashir instructs O'Brien on a rectangular device designed to inject him with the 2 rad doses of Delta isotopes. Explain to him that the device is already calibrated for the return trip, so all he has to do is press it again to return to the present. Bashir warns him they cannot wait too long or his body will fail due to severe radiation poisoning. On another note, O'Brien mentions a message to Keiko that he's left in his quarters. He wants Bashir to deliver it should the plan fail. Bashir understands. Upon activating the device, O'Brien transports to his quarters where the future O'Brien is asleep. He manages to wake and explains the situation. The two of them head quickly for ops, and on arrival, Rylan Warburg decloaks and opens fire on the station, taking out the shield generators in the first shots. Kira orders return fire, but it is no use. The Romans have hit the power core. The Virtual O'Brien realizes the orbiting quantum singularity was the power source of the Romulan ship, tells O'Brien to go back and stop it, but he can't. The radiation poisoning has taken its toll on his body. He would die if he did, and would then be unable to warn the crew. Instead, he takes off the device and hands it to future O'Brien, cursing to go back in his place. The new O'Brien wakes up in the infirmary next to Dr. Bashir, and that's how it went. After confirming it worked, O'Brien immediately contacts Sisko and Ops, raises the station's shields and readies weapons. Bashir quickly realizes that this O'Brien is different. It does have as many delta isotopes in his body, and his metabolic readings are completely different. In the wardroom, the Romans are interviewing Quark, with Sisko, Kira, and Odo barge in. Commander tells him to leave before revealing what he knows to Ruwan and Karina. He tells Ruwan how he remembered what he said about the Dominion being the greatest threat to the Alpha Quadrant for a century, and that if he truly believed he would want to close the wormhole for good. Kira finishes by saying that the Federation of Bajor wouldn't just stand by and watch them do it, so they would have to destroy the station as well and make it look like an accident. The two Romans deny the allegations, calling it mere theory. Sisko responds by informing them he has about 50 photon torpedoes locked onto their ship, and asks Odo to escort their guests to the nearest transporter room. In Quark's over darts, O'Brien tells Bashir how weird it is to be living in the past. It's like living the other O'Brien's life. Bashir says he's the same O'Brien, just with a few extra memories. As he leaves, he whispers in Quark's low, Dabo. Quark doesn't say what O'Brien means until a small crowd at the wheel yells, Dabo! Quark then yells for O'Brien to come back, who simply walks away, laughing. Nice. So let's take a look at some continuity surrounding this episode. Excuse me. Alright. Overall, O'Brien experiences 6 temporal jumps. He sees himself talking to Quark, he sees a brawl in Quark's, he sees himself mortally wounded by a phaser shot, he sees himself dead due to medical complications, he sees Deep Space Nine evacuated and subsequently destroyed along with the wormhole. He's sent 3.5 hours into the future to investigate the disaster, where he dies and is replaced by the other O'Brien. The chief O'Brien that appears from this point on in the series is the one from a few hours in the future. This is the first and only time we see Deep Space Nine destroyed. This is the episode in which Miles O'Brien introduces darts to Quarks, a game which will be featured throughout the rest of the series. The board itself was first shown in the previous episode, Profit Motive. This episode features the first appearance of the Daedrix-class Romulan warbird in Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This episode features numerous references to the battle between the USS Defiant and the Jem'Hadar in The Search Part 1. When Kira tells Odo that the Romans suspect he may have feelings for her, he responds by saying, ridiculous, in an incredulous manner. However, the audience already knows it to be true after he confessed to it in Heart of Stone. Kira Golovkin, who plays Jake Sisko, does not appear in this episode. So overall, I think this episode is pretty dang good, and the whole time-shifting element I thought was kind of interesting, so yeah. But of course, it does mean we have to say goodbye to the previous Chief O'Brien, and now we're stuck with the new ones, but hey, you know what? It's not that bad, so there you go. So overall, I give Visionary 4 warp cores out of 5. Well, anyway, tune in bed as we take a look at the next episode, Distant Voices. So, until then, live long and prosper, everybody.